If you were to mention the name fan car to the average petrol head, chances are they'll probably say one of two things, either, huh, or yes, because the fan car is arguably one of the greatest innovations of the motorsport world, and somewhat ironically, also one of the most underused, because it has a tendency of being banned very, very quickly. And of course, its inception was way back in 1970 with the Chaparral 2J, never actually won a race and was banned after one season, but the car showed what it could be capable of. Incredible performance, amazing downforce thanks to fans underneath the car, which literally suck the car to the road, in conjunction with a Lexan skirting system, creating almost a complete seal between the underbody of the car and the road below it, and literally removing air from underneath, creating that vacuum effect and giving you incredible downforce regardless of speed. And that is the real key to why the system is so good. Because for those who are unfamiliar with aerodynamics, what a rear wing does on a race car, put into very simple terms, is it forces the flow of air travelling over the vehicle to curve upwards, which has the effect of pushing the car down into the road. But the problem with that system, and you can definitely notice this on certain vehicles more than others, the Chaparral T1 and even a Formula car being a perfect example, is that you need a lot of airflow. So by definition, they don't work all that well at low speeds. The faster you go, the more downforce you have. And even then, they also become inefficient at extremely high speeds, because instead of producing downforce, they ultimately turn into more of an air brake, literally dragging through the air and slowing the car down. So the spoiler is a great invention in its own right, but at the same time, it's a very limited one in terms of its actual use. It's good at what it does, but it has a very narrow window of effectiveness, and it tends to be average to mid speeds. Really high or really low speeds, and it quickly becomes ineffective. And that, of course, is where the fan car comes in, because having those fans running at all times means 100% downforce, regardless of speed, and that is very, very competitive. Now, as I said, the Chaparral was banned after one season, then 8 years later we saw the iconic Brabham BT46B, which actually simplified and I would say improved the system, where instead of having a separate engine like the Chaparral had, it instead had the fans running off of the flywheel of the car, which is lighter, simpler, more reliable, and the results spoke for themselves. It was banned after one race, but at least it did actually win the race at the hands of Niki Lauda, and it won that Grand Prix event by 30 seconds. That's a huge margin for a Grand Prix race. Now, after that, things went pretty quiet. Now, I'm sure there are people with garden shed creations or custom hill climb cars that have occasionally tried to use fan car technology and just haven't really got the press. And I may even find some and discover them in the future and feature them in this series, but most people tend to know only of those two, because it's not exactly that widely used, because it often gets banned. So what's the point? Well, before we get to the vehicle in this episode, the other important thing that needs to be said is that actually there is technically kind of a third fan car that many people do not realise is one, which I would say technically isn't, but it's close to it. And that is the Mclaren F1. And a lot of people don't realise this, but the Mclaren F1 actually does have fans underneath to manipulate the airflow underneath the vehicle. So it's very close to being a fan car, but the reason why I would strongly argue that it is actually not a fan car is because, for one thing, it does not even attempt to seal the underbody to the road, and the whole point of a fan car is to do that. The McLaren is a fan car in as much as it tries to manipulate airflow underneath the vehicle and use it to its advantage. That's not what a fan car does. A fan car tries to eliminate airflow underneath the car by creating, by definition, a vacuum. They are two very different things. So of course I can understand why people would say that about the McLaren, and it's certainly closer than most street cars would get anyway, but that's about it. And of course in Gran Turismo we saw the Red Bull series, beginning with the X2010, which of course is a fan car, but doesn't run like that in real life. And that interesting juncture is where this little monster comes in, because in a couple of years' time we are going to see Gordon Murray's new T50 fan car, which will be on the street. But for now, this is about as close as we have ever gotten to having an actual fan car as a production or road-going vehicle. And the vehicle in question is of course based very obviously on the Ariel Atom. It's built by Ariel. It's a test prototype or a concept called the Aero P. And this car was designed and conceptualized with the help of two companies, Delta Motorsports and Total Sim. And basically what these two companies did were they developed the aerodynamic signature of the car in a simulation on a computer, and also did some simulated runs of what it could be capable of on a track. But basically what is involved is an Ariel Atom, of course, but that gets rid of the rear wing and instead has this underbody suction area, which is very visible with the big no step sign written on it, and it uses two electric fans underneath. So once again, completely different to what the Brabham did, completely different to the Chaparral, and these fans actually, also unlike those two vehicles, have different modes. So you can have it in passive or active mode. So you can actually have it so that you turn on the fans yourself and have them in effect running all the time, or you can leave it up to the car itself and to the ECU, more specifically, to engage and disengage the fans when necessary, which is technically an even more efficient system. So for instance, the fans will work under heavy braking, heavy turning, or under heavy acceleration. Anywhere in between there, and you don't necessarily need them. So it's a very clever system to have it not just giving you incredible downforce, but more importantly, only giving you incredible downforce when you need it the most. Because otherwise, even a fan system can under certain circumstances create excess downforce, such as at really low speeds, it can hinder acceleration. And you can even feel that, for instance, in Gran Turismo when you drive the Chaparral, especially in conjunction with the 3-speed gearbox. Now, as far as what these companies, Delta and Total Sim, did, Delta, first of all, is a company that simulated the times and the benchmark testing of the vehicle in, as I said, I believe a computer simulation. Total Sim, on their side of things, did what they call CFD, which is computational fluid dynamics, basically working on the aerodynamic signature of the car and mapping out how this system would affect the car's stability, its downforce, the reduction in drag compared to a wing, all that kind of stuff. And they actually have roots in Formula One, so they're a company that should be taken seriously, that's for sure. Now, Ariel have actually said that this system makes the car 15% more aerodynamically efficient than it is with a rear wing. That's a big difference. 15% is nothing to be sniffed at, and even as far as performance, although no official times, as far as I know, have been announced in terms of like acceleration or lap times or anything like that, what we do know is that it's fast. Very fast, and they said that they were very pleased with the results. They said it produces significantly more downforce. In fact, the quoted number is 3 times the amount of downforce that their rear wing usually produces, except the difference is it produces that from 0 miles per hour, whereas the wing only even starts to put out that kind of downforce at much, much higher speeds. So overall, what was the idea? Why is this an unsung hero? Why haven't we heard more about it? Well, the simple fact is Ariel did not intend for this to be a production car. They wanted it to have kind of a trickle-down effect that a lot of motorsport tech does have, where stuff that they learn from it would influence their vehicles, not just in terms of, ironically, performance, but also helping the environment in terms of emissions, for instance, because as they themselves said, having something like a rear wing, as I alluded to early on in the video, creates drag and actually wastes fuel in effect because it makes the car more inefficient. So this not only makes the car faster, it actually makes it more environmentally friendly. It uses less fuel, has less drag, and therefore lower emissions, which is actually pretty impressive. Not necessarily less emissions in a literal sense, but less emissions over time because of needing less fuel. So it's a pretty clever little system, and that was the primary thinking behind the car. They wanted it to be, in effect, a high-performance hybrid. That's pretty cool, I think, and who knows what kind of technology will be carried over from this into Ariel's presumably forthcoming hypercar, the full-bodied exotic that they teased a while back, which hopefully we'll still see more of in the future. So as far as performance goes, this is one of the most obscure in the whole series so far. But in terms of my personal favourites, of course it's way up there because I'm such a huge fan of fan cars, and this is about as close to a true fan car for the street that we've ever seen. And what a perfect car to feature it. Of course, the Ariel Atom is a prime candidate. It visually shows off the style, and you could see such huge differences, I'm sure, when actually driving it compared to the kind of ducking and diving that an Ariel Atom would usually do through corners with regular downforce. And apparently, and this is no surprise, but apparently the team behind it said that when the system is engaged, you can literally see the car hunker down and get really close to the road under such a tremendous amount of suction. So pretty awesome. It would have been awesome to see this car in action. So I would encourage you to look more into this. There's not a huge amount of information out there. And as I said, hopefully we'll see more about it in the future. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.